that you pray for.
Let's go ahead and get into my review for Hellraiser 2022. I have to say, at the top, this has been an excellent year for horror. We've gotten a lot of great horror movies. Some of my favorite movies this year are horror films. I mean, from X to Pearl, to Barbarian. I still need to see Smile Chat, but I've heard fantastic things about Smile. I'm hoping to see that maybe tomorrow morning and do a review on Saturday, along with all the other reviews that I still owe and need to do. Chat. There's so much content coming out right now. I mean, movies are definitely back in full force, chat. So it's kind of hard to watch all this stuff. But I said, you know what? I'm going to take the time to watch this movie and also, chat, at the same time, do an audio commentary for Hellraiser 2022. So you'll be getting, for all the people who are subscribed at the $2 tier level on the Patreon, you'll have access to a bonus video and audio commentary for Hellraiser. So please do check that out. But I have to say at the top, I am a Hellraiser fan, asterisk. I like, obviously the original Clive Barker story. And I'm a fan of the first two movies. They're very kind of self-contained, in my opinion. It acts as a good duology. If you literally, like the next movie picks up, I think like minutes later, like an hour after the events of the first one, which is pretty cool to me. And if you don't watch the last like 5 seconds of the second film, it's like, okay, the story's over. That's it. That's the end of Hellraiser. But they did sequels later on, chat, Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, and then they did the fourth one in space, and, they did a lot of VOD movies, and I didn't really care for those. They seemed to not understand what made those original movies so special, just the lore. And so, I've very much have written off Hellraiser for quite some time, not abandoning the idea of a new version of it or a new adaptation or continuing after the events of the first two movies and doing like a requel. And that's actually what was the big inspiration, chat, for this particular new version, which is directed by David Bruckner, who did a film, I forget if it was last year or 2020. He did this horror film called The Night House, which was on a lot of people's best of lists, and I still need to check it out. I'm not the biggest fan of, straight supernatural, horror, ghost stuff, exorcism, but apparently that movie was pretty good. So I gotta check it out, and I think that's probably why he was chosen. But the big reason why this movie was made, chat, was because of Halloween 2018. That movie was such a, critical and commercial success. It made a lot of studios kind of look at, like, oh, they're the various horror properties that they've owned since the 70s and 80s, and like, hey, let's do requels. Let's put, some goddamn effort into maybe new interpretation, whether it be requels or reboots or remakes or whatever. Let's put some effort into this, and that's what we have with this just called Hellraiser, chat. I do wish, these horror sequels or requels, they would kind of add a subtitle or something. I know we've gotten a lot of bad horror films where they have the original title and a subtitle underneath, but I don't know, just something to differentiate a little bit, because I always have to refer to it as 2022 now, and I got to refer to the original Hellraiser as like 1987 or when that movie came out, so it gets a little confusing. But the premise of this one being, it follows a young woman and a struggling, who's also a struggling drug addict. Her name is Riley, and she has to confront the sadistic supernatural forces brought on by the Lamet configuration, the puzzle box, chat. The Cenobites, and their leader, the Leviathan, and the Leviathan's leader of the Cenobites themselves, the leader of the disciples, the Hell Priest, which is not, they are not referred to as Pinhead. Matter of fact, Clive Barker has always been kind of resentful of that name. They've always been referred to as the priest or the Hell Priest. And I like that that's what they refer to the Pinhead-esque character in this particular movie. But yeah, chat, I gotta say, I saw the trailers for this, and I was like, I'm really liking what I'm seeing. It looks pretty cool. It looks like they're being respectful of the aesthetics of Hellraiser, the lore of Hellraiser, maybe going back to a simple approach. I was really liking the combination of both practical and CGI effects. Looks like they were balancing both of those well. They were just, I don't know, they just seemed to all be in sync of each other. And I gotta tell you, chat, it's just refreshing that we have a Hellraiser film that doesn't look incredibly cheap. Because when you think back to a lot of, because I've seen some, not all of them, but I've seen some of those VOD movies. Hell, look at Hellraiser 3 or Hellraiser 4. But when you look at those VOD movies, it's like, Jesus Christ, you're shooting like in someone's fucking spare bedroom in some of these shots. It just looks so cheap. in a lot of those VOD movies. And I have to say, like, I'm sure they didn't have a lot of money to work with, but they use it very, very well. And it was just so refreshing to have a Hellraiser that looked like, oh, this looks like they spent some money. It looked pretty goddamn expensive. I love that. I appreciate that. But the other thing about it also respects, I think, the best material of the past, specifically the first two movies, which are my favorite. The original Hellraiser, 1987, and then Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. You know, it's definitely borrowing aspects of those first two movies in terms of its aesthetics and its lore. You know, it acts as a kind of like a comforting window dressing that doesn't feel like a boring rehash. It's like it's borrowing elements from all those different movies, but it's also telling its own original the story, you know, its own original story. You know, they do reuse some stuff from those original movies, Chef, but they use them very well, in my opinion. They reuse and do covers of the original film score, and it's very welcoming, and I think it's just great how it's used throughout the entire movie. It really made me think about, because, you know, came to mind, you know, we got a recent reboot or requel to another Clive Barker property, and that was Candyman, Chad. We got that from 2021, directed by Nia DaCosta, produced by Jordan Peele. You know, you guys know I was very excited for that movie, but after watching it, I was like, I didn't like it. And one, because it completely just changed the lore of Candyman. It just did its own thing. Like, it's okay, sure, yeah, we're a sequel to that first movie, but they changed so much, and they didn't really lean into the things that made that first movie so good, so iconic, you know, especially when it came to Candyman himself, with Tony Todd's version of the character. It was very frustrating. You know, here, it's the complete opposite. They do a great job of reintroducing us to the lore and world of the Cenobites, and they don't make it feel exposition heavy. In fact, it's really intriguing what they reintroduce, and especially when visually, you know, it gives the film like a greater sense of scope, despite what's probably a relatively, you know, low budget. Again, going back to, like, it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't just feel like a cheap rehash. It's like we're taking things that are familiar, we're making subtle changes to them, but we're still being very, very respectful of those first two movies, which are, you know, so well liked. You know, I certainly like them quite a bit, Chad. And it was like, that's just great. Whereas, like, you know, think of like Candyman 2021, you're barely using anything from the first movie, and you're other than maybe, like, you know, exposition stuff. With the thing that worked best about the Candyman 2021 was everything with Helen Lyle, was Virginia Madsen's character, how they brought her back. I thought was very interesting in that movie. But outside of that, I thought there was like huge missed opportunities. This one, it's like, okay, you're being familiar, but at the same time, you're doing something new, and you're treating the aesthetic things respectfully. You know, and that's the thing. Speaking of the aesthetic stuff, you know, they blend, in my opinion, the CGI and practical effects very well for most of the movie. I can only think of really, like, there's probably one brief CGI sequence that looked a little iffy. And it involved like some barbed wire wrapping around someone. But other than that, I think it blends it very well. Like, I did all my hats off, my non-existent hats off to David Bruckner, who knew how to use CGI in a horror film. Because so often you think, oh, it's going to look like shit. It's not going to look good. It's going to look fake. It's like, what are you doing? And at least for me, the way in which he uses it in very dark scenes. Like, there are shots, like you see in the trailer show, you see the Leviathan, which is kind of the god, the warden, if you will, of the Hell Dimension. And every time they show it, it looks great. It looks great. But when they're also showing off the various Cenobite, you know, powers and abilities, especially the chains and how they're opening up corridors and different doors, it's like, it's all very good. It's all very good, chap. You know, clearly, just the Bruckner he knows how to use CGI in a horror film, where so many, you know, self-proclaimed horror directors just do not. They just do not. You know, and the Cenobites themselves, you know, they're reminiscent to their, you know, their leather-clad bondage versions from the original movies, but they make some subtle aesthetic changes that makes them feel fresh and intimidating, particularly with like their clothing. So, you know, I mean, like I said, like in the original films, you know, clearly it's like, okay, this is like a critique, or this is like a bastardized version of the BDSM community, sadomasochism, that kind of thing. And they're all in like, you know, like skin tight leather that's been stretched and everything. Here, their flesh is their clothes. They've been flayed, and like a huge section of their bodies have been flayed and then repurposed on their bodies again. And so it looks like they're wearing, you know, shirts or dresses, but it's like, oh no, that's actually their skin. Now it's like, oh, that's a really cool way. But because even if you look at like, the Hell Priest, who I want to get into Jamie Clayton's performance in just a bit, because I think they do a fantastic job. Like, if you look at them, you could like, oh, I could see the subtle similarities between her and Doug Bradley's version of the character, at least in terms of how they look. I was like, oh, I really like that. But that's the other thing, chat. Like, Jamie Clayton, I believe I'm saying her name or their name correctly. I just want to be sure. Jamie Clayton, who is playing the new version of Pinhead. They don't call Pinhead in this, which I appreciate. Clive Barker has famously said, I don't like when people call the Hell Priest Pinhead. It's the priest or the Hell Priest in this case. She is excellent. Or they are excellent. You know, their performance is captivating, and the voice is just perfect. You know, they're very much a worthy successor to Doug Bradley. There's something just kind of sing-songy about their voice. I just really liked it, where, you know, the original Pinhead, he had this very deep, intimidating one. It's like this Jamie Clayton's voice is also kind of deep, intimidating, but there's just, I don't know, there's something about it that I was like, I really liked it. It was a subtle difference, and it worked for me a lot. Love what they did. And I think the rest of the cast does a good job, you know, despite being treated like meat on numerous occasions in the movie, chat. No one, I don't think there's like anyone in the movie that is annoying or obnoxious. I mean, we have the character of Riley, who is played by Odessa Azion. Hope I'm saying their name correctly. And, you know, I mean, she could be a character that you can probably get very annoyed with. They are struggling, recovering drug addict. They were addicted to black tar heroin, Chad's like, Jesus, not even regular heroin, black tar heroin, the worst of the worst. So you could feel like someone like that kind of character get on your nerves. But I thought she showcased that struggle very, very well. And also the slippery slope of going back to like using harder substances. You know, I like that they showcase, like, you know, no, you can't consume alcohol, you can't consume these other drugs, or it could potentially lead you back down that troubled road again. I like that. You know, so often it's like, no, you immediately, when you're trying to kick the habit, you immediately go back to the hard stuff. It's like, no, it's slow and it's subtle, and you might not even think about it until you go from beer, you go from hard liquor, you go to pills, and then eventually go back. So I thought that was pretty cool that they did that. And I liked her connection, you know, with her brother and her boyfriend, which you feel like, is he an enabler? Like, there's a lot of cool things with her character. They did more work than I thought was even necessary for a character like that. And, you know, her suffering is so sweet. Then we have a human-esque villain in the movie. And I'm not familiar with this actor. His name is Goran Vizinjic. He's got like a bunch of apostrophes above 7 letters of his name. So if I'm mispronouncing his name, my apologies. He plays this very charismatic businessman named Mr. Voight, who is obsessed with the Cenobites. And he's very, very similar to the Doctor from Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. And so like a lot of that was pulled from Hellraiser 2. And you see that here. And all I'll say is I liked what they did with him, especially towards the end of the movie. I felt like that was a really great nod to Hellbound 2, but also doing its own thing. Like there's just some beautiful imagery in this movie. And I think the movie moves at a nice pace. They give you hey, for anyone who wanted gore, if anyone who wanted people being flayed alive and being tortured, having pins and needles stuck in people's throats and eyeballs and nose holes, and having people's dicks ripped off, you get some vagine and dicks ripping off, chat. Ripping out and ripping off. That you get all of that, all right? And so, yeah, I mean, I liked it for that. And it all looks really good. Like, it's a blending of both CGI and practical. And I feel like, for the most part, that's all handled extraordinarily well. Extremely well. So, yeah, I came away from the movie being very impressed. I really liked it. There's even shots, like, they even present, like, the Cenobites, like, almost like they're beautiful. Like, they're bastardized versions of Greek statues. There's a lot of statues in this movie, particularly when we go to, like, the last third of the film, when we're at this mansion. That's all I'll say. And I love how they do this mansion thing. It's like you realize, like, oh, what it actually is. It's pretty cool. I don't want to say what it is, but it's like, oh, that's awesome. But like they're surrounded by these kind of like Greek, you know, ivory colored statues, and you look at the Cenobites and you're like, oh, they blend in with those because of their very you know, white flesh. Although some of them also appear to be black as well. So clearly the Cenobites are taking people from different, you know, cultures and backgrounds and nationalities. I think it's neat. But yeah, and then you also have like other iconic Cenobites popping up. Other than the Hell Priest, The only one that actually there were two. There was the one that was often just referred to as the female. They have her in here. She's a modified version, but it's definitely her. And then they have the Chatterer, who's also in the movie too. And they do some interesting things with the Chatterer. I was like, I didn't know you could do that. But other than that, I really enjoyed the movie, Chad. This is another great horror film for 2022. If you're a fan of Hellraiser, particularly if you're a fan of the first two movies, I feel like you'll most likely like this a lot. I want to see another entry in this franchise. I mean, they open it up to do more. I hope it's a success in the same way that, Prey was a success. And we'll eventually see, but I really, really dug it, Chad. I'm excited. Also, I'm looking forward to what David Bruckner will do in the future. I want to go back, and if anything, this also makes me interested to go back and watch The Night House, his other kind of big claim to fame. He also did some stuff. He did one of the segments on the VHS anthology movies, so I might want to check that out. But in terms of the look, the cast, the direction, the blending of practical and CGI effects, this movie nails it, in my opinion, Jen. If I had to give this a rating on the Double Toasted scale, I think I'd probably a full price. I really dug this movie, chat. I give it a full price. Highly recommend it, chat. And definitely in the top 3 Hellraiser films that we've gotten. Although that's not hard to do. It's definitely not hard to do, chat. But it's up there with the first and second one, in my opinion. And all the other ones, chat, distant. 4th, 5th, 6th, yada, yada, yada. But I recommend the movie. Check it out. Check it out, chat. Oh, it's a low bar. It's technically, you're right, it's a low bar once you get past 1 and 2. That is true. But what about you guys? How did you feel about Hellraiser 2022 for those of you who have seen it? I am curious. I'm very curious.